CO2, you have talked about contingencies, right? Now, in CO1, you have talked about a contingent gain. What's a contingent gain? Have you talked about contingent gain in CO1? It seems like every time I ask a question in CO1, nobody seems to know the answer. Okay, first of all, have you heard about the term contingent gain? What is a contingent gain and what is the requirement? Anyone? A contingent gain is a gain based on what?
The cost of the event would be.
The possible event that could happen in the future that's going to bring a gain, right? What would be a good example?
Lawsuit that you might win.
You can argue about this, but lawsuit you can win is usually started with a potential that you may have a loss in the first place, so it's not quite a contingent gain situation. If you're living in a house or something, and the government is trying to improve the areas, and they need to buy off a property from you, then they might negotiate with you and then pay you like a fair market value, which is usually quite attractive. Then potentially you could have a gain. Okay. Now, contingent gain definitely is a gain that will be incurred contingently upon something is going to happen in the future, but you can only record the contingent gain when something is definite. So in other words, that if you reach an agreement and the government is paying you that money, then you can record the contingent gain as a gain for you. Do you follow? But today we're going to talk about contingency relative to losses, right? Now, I just wanted to think about warranty could be a form of contingencies as well, because it's contingent upon something goes bad and then you have to go in and fix it, whatever. So that could be a good example. Okay. Now, the IFRS rule and the SB rule is a little bit different in a different context, which I would like to talk to you a little bit about. But generally speaking, what is the general rule about contingency? Now, in IFRS, we talk about probability, right? Probability means that you would be talk about usually more than 50% chance something is going to happen. Okay, so definitely the general rule is if something is highly probable, meaning in this case over 50%, and then it's measurable, then you should record that contingency into your assessment. That's a general rule. Is it okay? SB is talking about likelihood, then normally again, these are not rules, right? These are just basically like a guideline that we actually kind of follow, but these are not cast in stone. When you talk about likelihood, many times we talk about 70% chance something is going to happen. IFRS talk about 50%, but SB talks about close to 70%. I just want to give you guidelines, right? These are not rules, these are not like legislation that you must follow. These are just giving you a reference that when you're thinking about its condition, you understand what to gauge and what to benchmark. So please don't say that, oh, this must be the way. It's not, right? It's just giving you a point of reference. So when you talk about something that's likely going to happen, that means you potentially have a 70% chance something's happened. If that's the case, then potentially if there's a loss, then you would have to account for them. Like you would have to, if they can account for it, then if measurable, then you would have to record it. Now, most of the time, you would have to account for the disclosure for all of those anyway, right? Okay. But in IFRS, we also talk about multiple obligation relative to single obligation. Single obligation is dealing with usually one-to-one. So if somebody, let's say if you go to a supermarket or something, you slip, right? Because of negligence of the supermarket, because there's like a puddle of water that they did not clean up in time and you actually foul, whatever. You sue the supermarket. It's a one-to-one situation, right? You're just dealing with them. But in a case like a warranties, it could be a multiple obligation because warranty is dealing with so many people, right? In the market, you don't know who will be getting the claim and not getting the claim, whatever. I'm pretty sure many of you have seen situations where, some people are smoking as an example, and many times there could be a collective type of appeal by a bunch of people together, and then they'll be suing like a company to do, for claims or whatever for smoking causing cancer or any other illness, whatever it might be. That would be an example of multiple obligation. Are you okay? Now, but what they're saying is that when you are having a single obligation under IFRS, what they're saying is that if you're given a range of compensation, now who's the best people to give you an estimate for the loss? let's say in a lawsuit situation, right? Because we always talk about lawsuit when it comes to top contingency, because that's the best example to explain to you. But many times you could have situations like environmental issues or other things. You could have a contingency situation as well. The government might be imposing on you on something, whatever. But then let's say if you have a lawsuit. If you have a lawsuit, who would be the best position to give you an idea that how much you need to pay out, or whether you even have to pay anything out? Who is who could be in that position that can give you sort of a good understanding about what's going on? The lawyer. So if you do have a lawyer that comes to you and say, you know what, I think that for this particular lawsuit, you could potentially lose, and if you lose, then you could be going anywhere for a range of, let's say, $10,000 to $30,000, whatever it might be, right? Now, the rule is that then, if you are giving a range, if you're a single obligation, if you're given a range, the range then is equally likely on both ends of the range that can happen. From IFRS perspective, you should always be recording the midpoint. You should always record the midpoint of now, provided both range are equally likely, right? That's what you needed to do. Now, most of the time then, if you're not sure, you would take the most expected, the one that has the most probability something's going to happen, right? So in other words, if you're given like a range, but they're not necessarily equally likely, then you would pick out a value that you think is what's the most probable something's going to happen to you in that regard. Is that okay? Now, ASPE, if you're giving a range, many times you will pick the lower end of the range as to what you needed to accrue. But again, ASPE talks about the same thing, that if you're not giving a range, but you're giving a few considerations in that regard, then you will need to pick the one that has the most probable something's going to happen as well. But remember that IFRS talks about single versus multiple obligations. Single obligation, if you're given a range, that most likely they're equally likely on both ends of the range, you would take the midpoint. Then if you're given a range under ASPE, then you would pick the lower range of the estimate, right? But in general, if they're just giving you some estimates, then you need to figure out if that estimate is really something that's probable or whatever it might be. Now, when you're dealing with multiple obligation under IFRS, you have to use what we call the expected value. Now, what's the expected value? The expected value is the weighted average of all the opportunities. So in other words, that if you have somebody that tells you, you know what, 10% chance you're going to get like 300,000, and then you have 50% chance you're going to get 400,000, and then you get the other 40% chance you're going to get 400,000 or 500,000, whatever. You take the weighted average of these amounts, right? That's what we call the expected value. So in IFRS, if you have a multiple obligation, then that's what you would do to come up with the value that you would accrue. Are you okay? Everybody's okay with those rules? That's something you need to. This is a little more intense than the one we talked about in PO2, right? But I just wanted to. But the general rule is do the same. So can we take a look at question number 1, please? Question number 1, I won't mark down the answer for you because I just want to have a quick discussion with you. Please jot down your own answer. Now, how do you record the liability? If there's a liability, how do you record them? You would just debit legal expense and crediting your estimated legal liability, right? That's what you would do. Is that okay? Or maybe something similar to those description. Okay, let's take a look at the first one. Fred injured himself when he slipped on the icy walkway, and then subsequently sued the company for $1 million for damages. The legal counsel think that there's 90% probability this is still found liable, and if GSI loses the thing, then they will be rewarded between 20 to 30,000, with all estimates is in the range equally likely. So tell me something. I wanted to ask you to talk about IFRS and ASPE. In this case, in IFRS, is that a single or multiple obligation? Is that one-to-one or one-to-many? This is a very simple question I'm asking you.
Single.
It's a single obligation, right? It's one-to-one, right? One person to one company, all right? Did it give you, now, is it highly probable something is gonna happen? Under IFRS, what's the benchmark?
50%.
50% because we talk probability, right? Under IFRS, so in this case, is it highly probable?
Yes.
Is it measurable?
Yes.
They did measure because the lawyer gave you an estimate, and what did they say? Under the single obligation, they give you a range which both ends are equally likely. How much do you accrue? You take the midpoint, right? You take the midpoint. In this case, how much would you accrue? $25,000, right? That's what you need to accrue. Now, every time when you accrue something, you have to make a disclosure as well, right? Are you okay? Because you have to explain what this accrual is all about. Does it make sense? Okay, what happened if this is ASPE? You pick the lower end of the range, which how much would you accrue? $20,000 in this case, right? Are you okay? Do you understand the concept? Okay, the next one is, they say that, they're gonna sue for $100 million. They said the radiation they're suing for this radiation, they said in the vicinity of her home is very close and so on, but the legal counsel considered this as being a nuisance. Then, is it a high probability? Is that something I need to accrue? Is it something I need to do? The lawyer tell you it's a nuisance, so what does that mean? Just forget about it, you don't need to worry anything about it and just forget about it, right? So you don't need to accrue anything or even disclose anything in that regard. Now, sometimes with disclosure, you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want it, because of disclosure, you're creating an alarm for the public to be thinking there's something seriously wrong and that affect the way that you're selling. But definitely, you also want to be ethical, but definitely, but then you need to watch out how you're gonna present that disclosure, whatever it might be, just to make sure it doesn't create any overly negative implication to what you're doing. That's one thing that's important. The next one I wanted to ask, which is a very interesting one, it said the province of Ontario has, they actually have a $20 million accidental, they sued the company for $20 million cost of cleaning up because they have some accidental discharge of plutonium. And then the company acknowledged the liability, they actually acknowledged fault, basically they acknowledged the liability. But the actual cleanup cost is somewhere between $14 to $16 million. The company had a $15 million insurance policy for negligence that's subject to a $2 million deductible. So first of all, is it highly probable?
Yes,
Why do we think it's highly probable?
because they acknowledge.
They acknowledge liability, right? So that means it's definitely highly probable. Is that the amount measurable for the damage? Is it measurable? They give you like a range, they give you like, whatever the loss could be, so it's definitely
Yes.
measurable. How much should I accrue then?
15 million?
15 million, I got one person saying 15 million, anybody else? Everybody agrees, everybody has a different thought, yeah? 2 million,
Oh,
okay,
two.
I have 2 million. This is like a bidding thing here. But it's going down, it's not going up? Okay. Okay, everybody's, one of the answers is correct, which one is correct? Now, when you have an insurance policy, that means that in this case, who's gonna pay for this damage?
The insurance.
Is the insurance company, the coverage, is that enough to pay the insurance? The insurance coverage is how much? I'm sorry, the damage is how much? Between 14 to 16 million, right? But how much is the insurance?
50 million.
No, the insurance is not 2 million, the coverage of the insurance is how much?
50 million.
15 million, so that's more than enough to cover the damage, right? But why do I accrue for 2 million? So number one, I don't need to worry about the damage because it's covered by the insurance. But why do I still need to accrue for 2 million? Because that is your deductible, right? What does a deductible mean? Deductible means that the insurance company is going to cover you anything more than 2 million. So in other words, that for the first $2 million you pay on your own, but anything afterwards up to 50 million, the company is going to pay, the insurance company is paid for. Deductible is a very, very common clause that you will find when you go for your own insurance later on. Definitely, the more deductible, the lesser the premium, right, that you have to pay. The lesser the deductible, the more the premium that you have to pay. So companies usually have to balance out. Even for the individual basis, you have to balance out what are the risks that you're taking and how much you can afford to pay, right, in that regard. So that's why you need to accrue for 2 million, because that's the deductible. Everybody's okay there? The last one, they said they sued Julie for $800,000. Julie's legal counsel believed that the plaintiff had 60% probability this might happen, and they said that the counsel believed that there's a 20% probability for 400, 30% probability for 600, and 30% probability for 700,000. Now, first of all, is this for IFRS? Is that a single or multiple obligation? How many people are suing how many people? It's 1-to-1, isn't it? So that is a single obligation, that's one. Secondly, can you tell me, is there high probability under IFRS?
Yes.
Well, technically speaking, yes, because they're over 50%. Are you okay?
Yes.
How much do you accrue?
The weighted average. of-
Is the single obligation, you don't go with weighted average, that you, if it's multiple obligation, you would go with the weighted average, but in this case, how much will I accrue? It's not a range they've given you different probability, you pick the most probable, right, which is in this case, how much?
Fif-
The most probable is how much? 600,000, right, so you would accrue 600,000 in this case. Are you okay? If this is ASPE, would they be doing anything differently? Technically speaking, ASPE using likelihood, that means it's around 70% chance something is gonna happen. This is actually below the 70%. So arguably, you may not be doing any accrual in this particular case, but definitely you should disclose because that's due an exposure, in this case, but company may choose to do it. As I said, these percentages are not cast in stone. They're not like, they're only references for you, right? And so that means that if the company believes that the risk is there and it's high, then even though they think it's only 60%, 60% is still pretty high probability, right? You really think about it, then maybe the company may still choose to accrue them. But technically speaking, from ASPE, you don't have to accrue it. Do you follow? But if it's a multiple obligation under IFRS, okay, then they have to accrue how much? They have to use the expected value, right? That means you come up with a weighted average. Is that okay? Now remember, ASPE, if you have to accrue, how much do you accrue? How much would they accrue? Same rule, right? You have to take the most probable, which is 600,000 as well. Are you getting some concept about how contingency actually works? It's not difficult, you just have to make sure you work through it and have some understanding. I think I'm going to stop here and then I'm going to go through a couple more questions with you. There's a couple more questions that I've actually shown up in question number 5, so I will just quickly go through them on tomorrow actually. For the session we're going to have makeup, but tomorrow I'll be starting to talk about chapter 14. The first part of it is relatively straightforward, was on top of bonds. I think most of you have done bonds in and out. I'm pretty sure you might be all an expert in bonds now by now. So we'll be talking, the first part of the bond is exactly identical to BO2. As a matter of fact, I picked a question that you've done BO2 as well. So that's one thing just to refresh your memory, so hopefully you can find it easy to understand. But tomorrow, in the bonds, we're going to talk about issuance, actually between interest payment dates, and that can be a little bit more challenging. Now, chapter 14 goes on to talk about restructuring, right? Restructuring of debt and those kind of things you need to do, and that can become complicated. Anyway, so I'll see you all tomorrow at 1 o'clock. It's online, so please go to the. I'm not going to post anything because it's difficult to post something to you. But if you can, oh, you know what? I do need to post it because you don't have caucus anymore.
Yes.
So I will post you the link for tomorrow's session, okay? Most likely tomorrow morning because I won't be finishing class until 7 today. So I'll like to post it for tomorrow morning. Take a look at it. All right.